Hello, and welcome back to Around the Counter with Molly and Friends. I'm Molly Jones, and this is a podcast for people who care about Utah politics. With me today are two people who care about the environment and about politics. They work at Stewardship Utah, which works to protect the land, air, and water for all people in Utah through elections, policy, and democracy. With me today is Travis Sweet, the election manager, and Piper Christian, a climate and air quality policy associate. Welcome Around the Counter.
Hey, thanks so much.
Thank you.
How you guys doing today?
Doing great. Yeah, really excited. Really excited to talk about some big wins over the last week. Haven't been able to dig into it too much with other political folks, so this is going to be fun.
Awesome.
I'm just happy that some of that wildfire smoke cleared, so we had some clear skies, at least for the time being. Doing well.
Yeah, I was in Portugal on vacation last week, and as we were flying into the valley, you could just see the wildfire smoke from the airplane, and I was like, "Oh no, what are we descending into?"
Yeah, yeah, it was a rough few days for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay, so Travis, looking at the wreckage of last week's primaries, from Stuart Adams' shocking ouster to the open rebellion in Box Elder County, voters seem to send a pretty clear message that they're tired of ideological echo chambers. Give us the top lines. Did Utah move away from extremism towards the middle, or did voters just reassert control over politicians who stopped listening?
I think it's a really great question, and I think that the answer to that I think is somewhat messier too, to say kind of wholesale what happened. But just to take a look at what we are looking at from last week, starting with the top of the ticket, we saw all of our congressional incumbents winning their races. So whether it was Celeste Malloy. Ben McAdams, technically not an incumbent in that congressional race, but I think we can probably put him up at that incumbent status. Incumbents just won across the board at the top of the ticket. And I think that has a lot to do with the amount of money these candidates were able to raise, some of the money that was spent from outside organizations and other states into these races. So that was one of the big through lines that I saw in the top congressional races. And then
Can you
uh
talk to us a little bit about the money? Like, who was donating? Where were they donating from? Who were they donating to?
Yeah, there were a lot of organizations, and without getting into the specifics on the exact groups, I mean, we saw like our the candidates who were incumbents receiving PAC contributions from outside organizations, super PAC contributions as well. We had organizations that, whether you're supporting data centers, you had I think aligned groups around even like APAC and these other organizations giving a lot of money. I think some of these candidates were raising over $2 million in some of their races. And just to kind of like show like what that was like for somebody like Carrie Ann Lisenby, who was running against an incumbent, didn't break $1 million in fundraising in that race.
She only raised $200,000, give or
Right.
take.
Yeah,
Where,
maybe.
and I think your point is really interesting because, for example, Chris Stewart, who formerly held Celeste Malloy's seat, he dropped his PAC, which is a political action committee for those listening at home. He dropped $1 million into her race, 2 weeks before the election?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
pretty insane.
a lot of money coming in. I think it's so difficult to really think about taking down an incumbent with that much name ID. I mean, Carrie Ann Lisenby as the example. We can even say Phil Lyman, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I think that was the one that probably surprised me the most in the congressional. I thought Phil was going to do a little bit better than he did. He got beat pretty bad in that race. I thought locals there were you know looking at his message, and we've seen him run for governor and a bunch of other things. He's kind of a lightning rod when it comes to public lands issues and other things. So I was a little bit surprised by that, but it
Same.
does really show the power of the campaign war chest. And we saw it in CD1 as well, with Ben McAdams versus the other three candidates that were to the left of him. Really hard. You couldn't outraise Ben McAdams in that race. And having the name ID that Ben had as well. And No,
Yeah,
with
and
me,
just for the
yeah.
viewers or the listeners at home, CD1 is Congressional District 1. It's mostly centered over Salt Lake County. It's the new district that was put into place this year or this last year from the ongoing gerrymandering wars, we'll say. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, you're good. Apologies for the elections jargon. But yeah, the
That's why
new
we like
donut
having you
hole,
on here.
the new donut hole district that Salt Lake County and the state of Utah has now created a new district for that is really likely to send a Democrat to Congress. And Ben McAdams, a former House congressional member, is running for that seat alongside Nate Bluin, current state senator Nate Bluin, and then a few political newcomers, Liban Mohammed and Michael Farrell, all running, and they were kind of positioning themselves to the left of Ben. And we saw, at least with the early reports, that Ben actually won kind of outright. And a lot of the commentary there was if the progressives or the lefty candidates were to kind of coalesce into one, then maybe they could defeat a more moderate candidate
Do you
like
think
Ben.
that's true?
I think that we could have a whole nother podcast about the how that campaign went, and like I feel like there's so much to it. If it's a 1v1 situation, how does that change fundraising? How does that change? I think a lot of the other candidates were fighting each other at the same time, and probably makes a difference. But that would kind of be the overarching view of all of that,
Yeah.
not to get too deep into it.
Just before we hopped on here, I was listening to Political as Heck with Scott Weiler. No, is his name Scott? Senator Weiler of Senate
Todd
District
Weiler?
8. Todd Weiler, thank you. Sorry, I don't know why I was calling him Scott. But with Senator Weiler and then Corey, who just won the nomination in Utah County for to be the county clerk. Corey Astle, I think is his name.
Yep.
Yeah, and they were talking about how I guess Senator Weiler ran into Liban Mohammed at a restaurant, and Liban was telling him that they had internal polling showing that if Farrell and Bluin had dropped out, that Mohammed would have won. And I thought that was pretty interesting. I also was on Twitter or X last night, brain rotting a little bit, and I was reading on Ben Peck was doing some amazing maps that were talking about, who voted in what direction within the county. And I just don't really think that a progressive could have won based on what I was seeing. The south of the county is so red. It's pretty moderate. And so it's like you have a really liberal heart of Salt Lake, but outside of the heart of Salt Lake, it gets a lot more moderate, all to the point of almost even Republican down in like Taylorsville and South Jordan and West Jordan and Sandy. So I'm not sure that I'm buying that argument either, especially considering the results, combined all of the three progressives versus McAdams. McAdams still won by 2 percentage points, and that's a pretty big win, considering how many hundreds of votes that was. So I thought that was an interesting race as well.
It's a wild district too, because it kind of it came out of nowhere. Also, I think you had somebody like Ben who was probably going to be running either way. In my opinion, was probably going to run for at least one of the districts, even if it wasn't the donut hole. And so you had this preparation going on already. And then you had a bunch of candidates that saw, oh, this is a really progressive district. Yeah. Kamala carried this district. If this was, in a 2024 race. So I think there's a lot of optimism there amongst, maybe the progressives that there's an opportunity here. And then I just also think like Ben, we didn't make Stewardship Utah didn't make an endorsement in this race. We were involved to some degree. Like we held an environmental debate to really showcase environment as well as a number of other issues outside of environment, just to have those conversations. And one thing that was really cool that, Ben McAdams is supporting is the America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. We've never had a congressional member in Utah support this bill, something that I think it was in the early 60s was when the bill was first released, and it hasn't passed, but it would essentially lock in over 8 million acres of public lands to be protected. And we've never had somebody from the Utah delegation actually support it. And Ben has multiple times on the record and publicly supported America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. So like, we're really excited that, it looks like Ben will probably be our next congressional member But excited to have somebody that wants to carry that.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. I'm excited to learn more about that. Let's talk just a little bit more about some of the other races that happened in the state Senate and the state House. There was a bit of an upset up in Davis County. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, yeah, and I know this is something Piper has been involved in a lot too, along with local residents around this data center. But yeah, I mean, to go back to like as we're talking about elections, while top of the ticket, we saw incumbents sort of stay safe. They were safe from being ousted, and some local discontent there. There was kind of the opposite feeling on the down ballot races, where incumbents took some pretty big hits, and it wasn't across the board. We did have some incumbents that kept their positions in Republican primaries. But yeah, Stuart Adams lost to Stephanie Hollist, and that was, yeah, I think a shockwave. I don't know if everybody saw that one coming. I think we had seen some polling that might be the case. And Stewardship Utah was involved in some polling in Box Elder County around the data center. And we polled Republican primary voters, and we saw that around 56% of Republican primary voters were saying, no, we're going to vote against anybody that approved this data center. And which, yeah, was really cool. And the reasons why, all the reasons you can probably imagine, the backroom deals, the lack of transparency, but also environment did come up as a big indicator for voters, specifically around like agricultural use and land use. I mean, we'll get into this more, I'm sure, but like, think about what the legislature is trying to say to rural residents. Like, you have to conserve water. You have to pay more for your water utility. But then when it comes to Kevin O'Leary, like, no, we're going to subsidize this he's not even a billionaire, but he's this multi-millionaire celebrity that comes in and is like, we're just going to
I love that's your cutting commentary. He's not even a billionaire.
Yeah, he's not. We keep calling him a billionaire, and he's not a billionaire. So yeah, I think, I just think voters were incredibly upset about how all of this played out. And for whatever reason it was, the data center was the key reason that those two Republican commissioners in Box Elder County lost their races. And I think it was also a key reason that Stuart Adams lost his race.
Yeah, I do agree that the data center was a bit of a lightning rod for Davis County. Although Trevor Lee, he also lost, and his district had some overlap with Stuart Adams' district. Do you think that he also lost because of the data center?
I'm sure there were voters that were upset about it. I think there's more reasons to vote out Trevor Lee. So I don't know if that's the key reason in Trevor Lee's case. I think there was a lot of local pushback on Trevor early. I mean, I think that what makes some of this messy too, I mean, we can look back, and Utah's got the convention process, and the way that delegates voted for their candidates at convention was pretty different from how Republican primary voters ended up turning out. Like, although some of the writing was on the wall, like Trevor Lee barely made it through his state convention or through his the Davis County convention. And I think that probably says a lot about how that primary election was going to go. So I'm sure
historically in Utah, negative campaign messaging really doesn't fly with voters. We're pretty nice, and we like our elections to be very nice. There were some, to me, pretty like eyebrow raising wow moments of messaging against Trevor Lee. Do you want to talk about some of that?
Messaging, can you be more specific? Like
Yeah. I mean, I was receiving text messages, and I forwarded a couple of photos of a mailer. And also there was a video from a former employer of Lee's who was claiming that he was signing fraudulent checks. He was forging checks. And I think he was also, I forget the specifics on that, but they were saying, don't elect Trevor Lee. He's a fraudulent fraudster, essentially. Did you see any of that?
I saw some of it. I do think that kind of stuff actually really upsets even, I think.
Why do you think that kind of messaging hits the voters, but something like you're a bad person or we don't like you doesn't hit?
because I think it's more real. I think it shows like the character as well of
Mm.
somebody even before they were a legislator. Because as a legislator, I think you can vote for things that, probably help, kind of create this message that you are fighting for your district and all of this. And then you look at something like that. And I don't think Utahns really appreciate somebody that has this type of baggage and background, and how they work a business or how, and yeah, we see, some of that where it's like, how many years ago was this? Is he currently, there's questions about, is he currently involved in any of this? I think all of that probably led a lot of voters to say, like, let's go in a different direction this time around. Plus, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
obviously in Salt Lake County, there's so many voters that dislike Trevor Lee. And I was surprised to some degree, like, how much of an impact that story in particular, along with, I mean, on his record, he hasn't been able to do much up at the state legislature. And I think that really impacted him too.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about the results of elections, but over the last few weeks, a big part of your job is to be on doorsteps, knocking on doors for your endorsed candidates. So talk to us a little bit about what regular Utahns were saying on the doorstep about the issues of environment and climate that you guys care about at Stewardship.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on where we were. So, we supported a lot of candidates this year in their primaries, some of them pre-convention, some of them post-convention. And so we were involved, let's say, like with Senator Stephanie Pitcher, who's running in Salt Lake City and in the Mill Creek area, and talking to
She's
voters
my
around.
representative.
She is. That's wonderful. We love Stephanie, and she has just been so great on our issues, but not just like, I'll also shout out Andrew Stoddard here as a House rep, District 40, two legislators on the Democratic side that have both been so impactful on environment, not just by, saying that they support, policy around climate, but really actually like doing the work at the legislature, just been so effective at doing all of that. So it's been really wonderful to work with them. And yeah, in both of those districts, talking about environment, you can kind of talk about it a little bit more holistically and say, like, climate is a lot of people agree with us already. So a lot of the work of like persuading voters on these issues has kind of already been done. We don't need to dive too deep, and a lot of people agree with us. Is basically what I'm trying to say on like
Okay, so
broader
let's
issues.
let's give some examples here. When you're talking about the wildfires or the disappearing Great Salt Lake or air quality, are voters themselves framing it as a climate crisis, or is it more of an immediate pocketbook issue of affordability? If the lake dries up, I'll never be able to sell my house, and now I'm, out $100,000 or whatever.
Yeah, I would imagine it's a lot of all of it. I think voters a lot of times, at least in Salt Lake County, when we're talking to folks like closer to Salt Lake City, let's say, are thinking about this as like an existential issue around like the fires burning, these lands that are burning, what's happening to the air, all things that are happening as a result of climate change and all of this. When we're talking to voters, I think in more conservative areas, let's say Davis County is a good example, or even Utah County is an example. When we talk to voters, often making the connection to the pocketbook does make a pretty big difference in how it affects, how the data center specifically affects your energy prices, how the data center works on the level of transparency and how it went down, the backroom deals, this understanding of like, these like dark rooms where people are smoking cigars and making decisions, like all of that, I think is the view that people have, are just so upset with, and why people hate politicians generally. So I do think those conversations are a little bit different in those areas.
That's interesting. So when one of your environmentally minded candidates wins in a conservative or a moderate Utah district,
Mhm.
it's not because voters have suddenly become climate change warriors? Is it more that the candidate, it seems like you're saying the candidate successfully connects ecological stewardship or pocketbook issues directly to a person?
Yeah. I don't, and I think in the legislature, we're seeing somewhat of a change and a shift in how legislators are viewing action on environment, because we're able to make the connection to these very local issues and how it's affecting individuals. Like the Great Salt Lake is a great example where we're knocking doors for Cara Toon, for example, somebody who's running for an open seat, Carrie Ann Lisenby's former seat. And so doing the work in that district where you're so close to the Great Salt Lake, voters there and Republican voters there are actually very well aware of what's happening with the Great Salt Lake and how it does impact the resale of their home, the future of like the life that their kids are going to live as well. I think talking to conservatives also about, you know, these lands that you grew up on, that you used to go and fish at, that you used to go and recreate in the mountains, like those things are the things that are up for sale or kind of being threatened. I think that frame of messaging really connects, with more conservative minded voters.
So there's something you said here that I'm not sure everyone else cottoned onto is that you guys are supporting not just Democrats. You also work with Republicans and independent candidates. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
Yeah. So maybe just a little like to give a background on stewardship, if that's okay, just quickly. You know, we're about 2 years old. We're the result of a merger between O2 Utah, which is the organization that myself and Piper came from, as well as the Rural Utah Project. And the Rural Utah Project was really focused on public lands issues in southern Utah, working with Navajo Nation and helping register voters in that area. O2 Utah was much more focused on climate. We were focused on air quality along the Wasatch Front, doing work in northern Utah as well, and some parts of the Wasatch Back. And so we decided to merge just a few years ago. The whole premise of, you know, our organization's existence was really that we wanted to make a difference on climate in is a supermajority state of Republicans. I don't think we have to be shy about the existence there. And in order to pass environmental policy, you have to build relationships with Republican legislators. And there are certain legislators that are just absolutely terrible on these issues. And, you know, we get involved in elections to build relationships, to help inform legislators, and also to show up when they need us the most, which, is the election. And so we carry those relationships over from our elections work, whether we're challenging somebody or we're trying to keep a candidate safe in their district. Bring those relationships up to the Capitol, where, you know, Piper kind of takes the hand and works on our air quality policy up there.
That's cool. So let's touch on that a little bit, Piper. You spent a pretty significant chunk of your life living at the Capitol during the legislative session. Here at Around the Counter, we love exploring the like machine under the hood of politics, how it works, why it works, and also importantly, who it works for. So walk us through a day at the Capitol when a crucial environmental or air quality bill is on the table. Like, what does a backroom pressure look like?
Yeah, well, I think it really is an all hands on deck, especially when there is a vote coming up for a critical piece of legislation. I think when we think about under the hood or behind the scenes, it's important to know that a lot of that backroom pressure is happening months before those votes or those deliberations. So it's really important we use the interim session to build relationships, to get the right parties involved, to really establish credibility on the issues we're working on. And then day of, it really depends on what bill we're working on. Sometimes a legislator will have questions. We want to connect them with the right people with expertise. It's about getting the right folks to testify. So who is going to be the right messenger? Often it's not our organization out front. It's finding friends in the space who we know lawmakers are going to trust. And then a lot of counting and whipping votes. So as Travis touched upon, I think one of our strong suits is building really great relationships with a broad swath of legislators across the spectrum. So it's really looking at who sits on committees or on the House or Senate floor, figuring out who we need to talk to make sure we have the votes.
That's really cool. And I think tying in what Travis was saying earlier, that means that y'all work in politics because you're setting a bench to help yourself pass specific climate policy. And so helping Republicans, independents, Democrats get elected allows you to have those relationships. And it builds trust and confidence that when you come to someone, you know, as the more lobbying arm, I'm not sure if you call yourself a lobbyist, do you?
Yes.
Okay,
Registered
great.
lobbyist.
Congratulations. But when you come and say, "Hey, I'm a lobbyist with Stewardship Utah," then you have a much warmer welcome than if you just showed up and you're like, "Hey, do the right thing."
Right, exactly. And I think there's understandable I think wariness of lobbyists at times. I think that what we really try to do is also connect like many advocacy groups, connect lawmakers to their own constituents and make it clear, listen, I'm going to talk about these issues, but folks in your own district also really care about this, and your decision is reflective of what your constituents want.
That's interesting. So do you feel like the, machine of government is working exactly as intended for its legacy players? Or is there a genuine interest among lawmakers to fix and tinker and change things to make it better for everyday Utahns as they're currently experiencing their lives?
Such a good question. And the answer is nuanced. For me, I think that we have a lot more work we can do to make this system work better for Utahns. And, touching upon the data center, I think, silver lining of that is it laid bare some of the challenges and issues and ways that maybe our elected officials are falling short in accountability and transparency to the public. And so I think those create really good opportunities for public pressure to correct that system. So I think what no matter where people landed on the data center, for example, I think there was this consensus of this process didn't feel fair. It felt like decisions were made before the people really impacted got to weigh in. And I think that we do see that. We've seen that in other instances, many other instances in the legislature and in other positions in Utah. And it's important that we continue to shape our government to be more accountable to folks.
Okay, so you have a perfect magic wand with a perfect magic world. What changes are you making?
Oh my goodness, what a good question. I don't even know where to begin. There's, I think one that actually a lot of lawmakers themselves have raised their own frustration is we have the shortest legislative session in the country, and we are passing an extraordinary amount of bills each session. And something we observed last session is that at the end of the session, there's an enormous backlog of legislation, and they wipe the queue clean and then get to reprioritize legislation.
Wait. There were over 1,000 bills presented last year, and they only passed like 300 or 400, right? So I'll say they pass 400, 600 bills just go away.
So basically they'll bring those bills back up onto the board. So the board being like, we have a queue of what order we're going to be passing legislation in the last week of the session. And a lot of bills don't get to like the final decision making point until that last week. And so when we have this huge amount of bills, and then really it's folks in leadership who then get to decide which bills to prioritize. So it can feel like, hey, this is good legislation, but sometimes these crazy one-off messaging bills or random ones that really don't serve Utahns and also cost taxpayer dollars to write and review and deliberate on are getting through while other important legislation falls through. So I think one thing, it's kind of wonky, is limiting our number of bills that we pass and having a lot more discretion about those sneaky little rulemaking processes that really funnel decision making into only a handful of legislators and aren't really reflective of what Utahns want.
So 2 questions before I lose my train of thought here. One, it seems like Stuart Adams, in large part, he has been in the Senate for 20 years. He's been the speaker for the last 8 years in the Senate. He has largely controlled this end of session process that's happening. So he has had a large amount of power to shape what bills get passed in Utah. And I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if that there's a backlash against some of that. Do you think that's right in his
Absolutely.
Unelection?
And I apologize. I think there's maybe some construction going on in the background in my audio.
I also have a little construction going on, so it's fine.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that you kind of synthesize that nicely, is that that issue of rulemaking at the end of the session is only one example of the way that power is pretty concentrated, and that it can feel then like not only does not every legislator have equal say, but then that Utahns don't really feel like this process is actually very fair. And so I am really interested to see what this recent election, how that's going to affect decision making. I mean, I'm extra salty about the rulemaking process because now we have had 2 different bills that our org has worked on literally just run out of time. And that's really unfortunate. So I think that there's room for improvement there.
Can we go back in time? Will you explain a messaging bill?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So this was what Trevor Lee, I think in particular, was notorious for. He ran a lot of things like this. So it often is weighing in on issues that maybe doesn't materially change statute a lot, but is more to just maybe bring something back to his delegates to talk about.
Do you have a good example?
I do. I think a great one, I believe there was a bill this past session. There is Harvey Milk Boulevard in Salt Lake City, 900 South, named after the great San Francisco mayor Harvey Milk, who is openly gay. And there was I can't remember who sponsored it, effort to change that to Charlie Kirk Boulevard, if I remember that correctly.
I believe it was Trevor Lee.
It was a Trevor Lee. Ding, ding, ding,
ding. It was Trevor Lee.
Yes. So this is an example of, we have all of these Utahns talking about struggling with their, pocketbooks and balancing a checkbook and breathing the Great Salt Lake dust and all of these things. Fighting over the name of a street is not actually serving Utahns. And those are some of the things that end up taking up a bunch of time. This is a side tangent, but it is my...
No, it's a great rule change. Well, and I think it actually illustrates a really important machine under the hood of policy here that I care a lot about. So Trevor Lee was the head of the Rules Committee, which means that he was the powerful legislator in charge of deciding what bills go in what order, passing in and out of the legislative process. We're doing some hand-waving magic here for folks who are listening, but essentially he was able to pass things forward to put them on the floor to be considered more efficiently than others. And so for him to be able to take up time and brain space in legislators' heads to talk about mandating a street change in the capital city where he doesn't live is not really what I would consider to be good policy or good politics, although maybe it is good politics for his red meat base voters at home.
Yeah.
So speaking of advocating on issues, in 2025, Stewardship Utah had a pretty massive win lobbying to regulate emissions from heavy polluters like U.S. Magnesium, which sits on the shores of the Great Salt Lake and used like buckets and buckets and buckets of water. U.S. Mag is a pretty clear instance of a company like being a bad neighbor to the Wasatch Front. So Piper and Travis, how did you convince a supermajority Republican legislature to crack down on a major company? Like, how did you convince them that wasn't anti-business, but was actually protecting the health and economic prosperity of everyone downstream?
Yeah, well, happy to get us started. I think that going back to our relationships that we built, particularly the session that we worked on this, we early on in the session had a forum, especially of of different Republican legislators who were interested in environmental issues or interested in stewardship. And we talked about this concept and really, framed it as a good neighbor of a lot of different companies are playing by the rules. This one clearly is not and is costing Utahns. And we were, through the different relationships we built, we're really able to build this kind of coalition across the aisle of people who said, this is not a red or blue issue. This is just an issue impacting Utahns and something we need to really address.
Maybe just to tag a little bit onto that as well. I mean, this is the story around US Mag has been kind of happening for a long time. Last few years, US Mag there was an article that was written, a study that was done out in, I think it was actually funded by the state legislature here, that showed that U.S. magnesium's pollution was actually contributing to upwards of, I think, 20%. Is that right, Piper? 20%
Into
of
25%. Yeah.
25% of Utah's wintertime inversion. Directly responsible is this
Excuse me while
war.
I say, shut up. What?
So
What?
yeah, I'm gonna go into this, but yeah, Piper, correct me if I'm wrong because you understand the science of this way more. But essentially, there's a halogen emission, a direct byproduct from U.S. magnesium that was interacting with our air quality during our inversions, making that basically supercharging our inversions. The emission is called bromine, one that the EPA doesn't even regulate because it's not traditionally like seen or viewed as like a really toxic halogen. Other halogens like chlorine would be in that category too. And so Utah's a really local, or Salt Lake County especially, has a really local problem with this bromine directly associated with the byproduct from U.S. magnesium. And so once that story broke, it also helped really carry that part, which was a piece that we had in a bill that we were running back, I want to say in 2022, that, or maybe even 2021, that we were working on to try to limit what U.S. magnesium was allowed to actually produce there. But yeah, all through that, like building relationships with legislators through their elections kind of brought us to a place where the way that one of my co-director, David Garbett, would kind of put it, like, working with Republicans, especially on environment and climate issues, it's really hard to like expect them to be like the most knowledgeable on climate issues, to be so far ahead on some of these issues. Like working with some of our Republicans, it's really hard to expect them to be so far ahead, and working with them to be more incremental on how they're thinking about these things has been really helpful at kind of bringing them along this process.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So, if I understand what you guys have said here, there's a pretty big picture at play. Starting in 2020, maybe 2021, stewardship begins working on pieces of legislation that are chipping away at U.S. magnesium. You're trying to reduce the bromine, or you're trying to regulate bromine emissions, and then you're trying to regulate other emissions, and then you're trying to regulate how much water certain companies can take in and out of the lake. So along with doing that lobbying work, you're also going out, you're knocking on doors, you're electing candidates up and down the ballot who are on both sides of the aisle to build a coalition so that in 2025, 4 or 5 years later, you're able to come together at the Capitol with this broad coalition and say, this is a bad neighbor. We need to stop what they're doing. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what is even more exciting is that in the last legislative session, then we saw a real exciting moment of actually our legislators, probably the most one of, if not the most significant air quality decision the legislature has ever made, was when it basically assumed ownership of U.S. Magnesium. There was a ongoing bankruptcy lawsuit that was happening. The company was trying to basically file bankruptcy to potentially reopen, and the state put the brakes on that. The state bought out U.S. Magnesium. It is closed. And as we said, probably one of the most impactful decisions for air quality. And, we feel that, working on that piece of legislation the year prior that put in major restrictions on what the company could emit if they did operate, it's always about pushing that needle a little bit further and a little bit more forward, because then we got to be in the room for some of those decisions and deliberations for this huge decision that was made. So yeah, I think it's really exciting. It can feel incremental and slow at times, but then, it's always like feels impossible and then becomes inevitable. And that was really gratifying to see.
So we've talked about this really exciting moment where you guys worked tirelessly for years on doorsteps in the Capitol halls, and you achieved something you really cared about. Talk to us about the other side of that. Like, what happens to all the bills that go to the floor and die? How do you feel about them? Do we mourn them?
It's more of a resurrection type situation. So I think there's always hope, but I know, Piper, you can speak more to the actual bills that, yeah, we have not been successful on.
Yeah, we joked actually that our U.S. magnesium bill in 2025 was the ultimate zombie bill. We brought it back from the dead. It was killed in committee, and then you can have somebody who voted against it can make a motion to bring it back to reconsider. So we have pulled that stunt a few times now. We love a hard fight, so we often are running legislation that dies and then has to be resurrected. But yeah, I think that there are a lot of bills that have not made it across the finish line that we're extremely proud of. Because I think often the bills that die are the ones where you are stress testing new innovative ideas, you're building critical relationships. And so it often isn't a 1 year effort, it's multiple years. And those bills that die are often some of the most valuable for getting us new information and new relationships.
What's your favorite bill that has died that you're going to resurrect next year?
Oh boy, do I have one. So we've worked for a few years on one that is a heavy duty vehicle emissions piece of legislation. Sounds wonky in name, but basically what this bill does is just says that for our worst emitting vehicles that operate in Utah, these are our old heavy duty vehicles, diesel trucks, not passenger vehicles like dump trucks and haulers. They're responsible for an enormous share of our emissions on the Wasatch Front. It just says you can operate those vehicles, but you need to pay a registration fee, an additional fee to offset the impacts of the air quality impacts of your vehicle. And this would be pooled into a fund that the Division of Air Quality could use for amazing air quality programs in our state. It'd be a pretty landmark piece of legislation, and especially for generating income for or funding for air quality programs. And the fact that something this, extraordinary got all the way to the Senate floor and just died in the last week of the session, I think is such a testament to the political direction that our state is going in terms of legislators caring about air quality. So we're excited to bring that one back.
And that's a pretty big shift from where we've been even 5, 10 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think even in just since starting to work at Stewardship Utah, the shift I have seen in bipartisan interest in air quality has been really heartening.
Wow. Okay, so now we know how to get someone elected. Thank you, Travis. And then we know how to help them get good environmental policy passed. Thank you, Piper. Let's look at a massive systemic issue to close out this topic. And y'all know where I'm going with this one. The explosion of tech data centers in Utah. These facilities require incredible amounts of electricity and water to cool the AI servers. At the same time, everyday citizens are being told to shorten their showers and let their lawns go brown to save the Great Salt Lake. Travis, from an election standpoint, the outgoing Senate President Stuart Adams and 2 of the 3 Box Elder County commissioners have linked their approval of the Box Elder data center to their electoral losses. Is that the right way to think about this primary election?
I think for some of these races, absolutely. I think the data center makes a massive through line connection between Box Elder and President Stuart Adams' defeat in this election. I think it was really clear. I mean, we basically gave us this data center that was such a hot topic right when primaries were starting to heat up, right before ballots were about to drop at people's mailboxes. And it was on Fox News, national Fox News. They were going after local, locals in Box Elder, locals that, that Piper and I even work with in the election space, calling locals Chinese, part of the Chinese Communist Party. Like it was kind of crazy. And the amount of content that came out about it it circulated for so long and so fast. I mean, people are still so worked up about it. There's still a lot to be done.
But y'all didn't just let Fox News come and yell at you and let Kevin O'Leary do that. Y'all actually did something about this, something bigger than. Can you explain some of what how you reacted?
Yeah. So immediately once the data center was voted on by the Box Elder County Commission, they gave the opportunity for public comment that lasted about 2 seconds before they cut it off. And so we decided that we wanted to run a referendum against this. And what it turns out, there were actually quite a few locals in Box Elder that were already planning to challenge this vote. And so who already stepped up. The name of the organization is called BEAR. They formed an organization, political issue committee, I believe. BEAR, the Box Elder Accountability Referendum is what it stands for. So everybody go and follow BEAR on social media. And they basically just locals, groups of, local moms, farmers, just people that are just so upset about this, all came together and really work against like the county commission and all of that. And so we're working with them through a legal process right now to be determined, but we're hoping that we'll be able to actually challenge this through voter referendum.
What does help from a group like Stewardship Utah look like? Is it money? Is it boots on the ground? Is it advice and strategy? Is it all of that and then all of Piper's time?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of like all of that. And in a situation like this, we think it's really important that the communities get to lead this. I mean, this is something that's landing in their backyard, something that's part of our home as well, being, folks that live in Utah too. So of course we have our relationship there, but we really want to make sure that the voices in Box Elder are being heard. So first and foremost, like the front facing part of this is, Box Elder voters and the folks at BEAR, like they are going to be the ones really on the charge here as we talk about this. And at the same time, we want to be able to support them as best as they need and as any way that we can. So in some cases, it could be financial. There's a long way to go as we're going through this process, working on recruiting volunteers or working to get people actually like out on the doors, going through some of these like legal processes. We have some resources that we can connect with the folks there on. So yeah, I like to think that we're being really helpful, and I guess, time will tell as we kind of go through this process, what's going to happen.
That's great. So on this show, I talk a lot about neighborism. I don't know if you guys know about that. I'm like really on it. And neighborism is the idea that the best thing an individual can do for really big problems like the data center is to stop acting like an individual and to start acting and to start building a localized community. And that localized community, in my opinion, starts at your home, right? Your neighbor next door, my neighbor next door, he and I see differently politically, but that doesn't mean that, when that giant windstorm happened in 2020, tree fell down in front of his house. We went out there, we helped him clean it up. Like that's just what it means to be a good neighbor. And so how does Stewardship Utah use that kind of philosophy? Because that's what I think I'm hearing from you in this BEAR referendum is you heard your neighbors say, we don't want this, we need help. And you have expertise on the Capitol, you have expertise on the doorstep, and you can also bring resources that are more than just money to help them do that. So like, how do you use that philosophy to defeat the kind of paralyzing anxiety that people are feeling about the future right now?
Yeah, I'll jump off. I mean, it's a really good question. I do think connecting to your community is so important and feeling like, yeah, the data center is such a great issue to kind of think through this on where that really crosses through the political divide. It really does not matter where somebody stands politically when it comes to the country's largest data center that would use, what is it? I think more power than the entire city of New York. Right in the backyard in lands that we don't build houses on even. And so like it's pretty cool to see. I've been hoping that we have more issues like this that can really bring us together. We need more things that like the left and right, like wherever you fall on this political spectrum, are able to like actually come into agreement on, because yeah, at the end of the day, it like really does not matter where you fell on the political spectrum when it comes to this data center. The vast majority of residents in Box Elder thought this was a terrible idea. And I think it will lead to good change. But yeah, I want to see more of more collaboration, I guess would be a better way to put that.
Nice.
Yeah, and I guess lastly, seeing the way that Box Elder, those are just like moms and local residents in that community, and so just seeing the way that while this was we aren't happy with how this played out, I think it shows the ability of just like grassroots efforts really creating something incredible.
Yeah, so Piper, someone is sitting at home watching the world burn through a phone screen, feeling completely left out. What is the blueprint for them to step onto a doorstep or join you on the Capitol, or like get involved in local land management policy without it feeling overwhelming?
Yeah, well, I have to shamelessly plug Stewardship Utah. I think that we have a lot of really great avenues for folks to be able to get involved. So following us on Stewardship, following us on Instagram, on social media is really important. We are stewardshiputah.org. We have a sign up page for volunteer sign up, and also following the Box Elder Accountability Referendum. I think that they are really creating a blueprint for how neighbors can meet neighbors and connect around issues and create political power. And so I think, but in terms of actual tangible avenues, we have days that you can come up at the Capitol and lobby with us and other organizations. And I think always getting active through voting. You can knock doors for candidates that you care about, especially those down ballot candidates make such important decisions. And we have a lot of opportunities for you to phone bank and support those decision makers that are going to really impact your community.
Yeah, and just to shout just a few more things as well there around what we do up at the Capitol. This last legislation was really exciting because we were able to connect so many new people that were interested in the legislative process. And honestly, like somebody like me, I don't spend a ton of time up at the Capitol during the legislative session. Like elections are my bread and butter, and I get, somewhat of time away while that is happening at the Capitol. And I often we're in our meetings talking about what's happening there, and I'm like, wait, what does it mean when a bill is circled versus? And I'm like asking these questions, and I can't even imagine somebody that's not as connected in these types of organizations working on this every day, and like how does this stuff work? And so we've really tried to connect people to the legislative process and how this stuff works, and really, kind of give action alerts when bills are being heard in committee, bringing people up there to actually, whether it be to testify or just to sit in and hear what's going on. There's been a lot of work done. So if that's something that interests you and you're listening to this and saying, oh, I want to know more about how this process works and I care about the environment, like what role do I have to play here? Like we would love to connect you there. And then for my other shout on elections, like candidates down ballot, man, we need more people out there. It's like, yeah, our team goes out and we knock doors for a lot of our candidates, and candidates desperately need volunteers. That's how these campaigns operate. Not a lot of money is spent in some of these down ballot races, and a lot of the candidates don't have a ton of paid staff going out there. It really does happen at the grassroots level with your neighbors talking about the issues, and even putting a yard sign in your lawn could make somewhat of a difference. So I think any of those things would be helpful.
Nice. So our final question, Travis, how are you finding joy in your life right now?
Right now I've been spending a lot of time outside, minus some of the wildfires that are going on. I got a little bit more into gravel biking, and so I've been spending some time, hitting the trails on the bike, which is good break for my mental health. So that's how I've
That's
been
great.
spending time outside.
Piper, how are you finding joy in your life?
I just love Utah, like at every season. So in the spring, I'm out in the desert. The summer, I'm up in the mountains. The winter, I'm skiing up in the mountains. So I love all of the nearby stuff that you can check out in this state. So that's how I've been finding joy.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Piper Christian and Travis Sweet. And thank you for listening today. You can catch Around the Counter with Molly and Friends on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Substack, or anywhere else you can get your podcasts. We are on Sugar House Community Radio Sundays at 8 p.m. and Wednesdays at 7. See you next